Hi there. I'm Jeannie Jones again, and I'm glad you're with me one more time for Discovering Joy in Philippians. This week we read chapter 3 and finished the homework in there, and we're going to discuss a couple questions from that just a little bit later. Oh, by the way, I'm wearing sunglasses because I have a broken blood vessel, and I thought, if I'm going to be wearing sunglasses, how fun. We'll come outside, and it's a really beautiful June day here, so you get to see the flowers and enjoy them with me. So anyway, this week, what I wanted to talk to you about was the evidence for the resurrection. The reason I want to talk about that is that there aren't too many things that can kill joy faster than doubt. If you think that faith is just a matter of I believe, and isn't based on any evidence, then when hardships come, it's easy to doubt and say, well, is there really any evidence for what we say we believe, and in particular for the resurrection of Jesus Christ? So that's what I want to talk to you about this week. In chapter 4, I have put for you a, let me get this all together. On page 77, we're going to be looking at the evidence for the resurrection. Right here, I put a sidebar on it as well. Now, in Acts 17:31, which is right here, I'll read that to you. It says that God has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed, meaning Jesus. And he is giving proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. Well, what is that proof? What is that evidence? Dr. Gary Habermas has put together a list of what he calls minimal facts. He's gone through and taken the writings of atheists and agnostics and found what they all agree is historically true, or what most of them agree is historically true. And he's put together a list of 6 of these facts. And I've listed them here on the sidebar, and I want to go over a few of these with you. Number 1, it is that Jesus died by crucifixion. That's a fact of history. We have not only the 4 Gospels, Acts, and 1 Corinthians that tell us that Jesus died by crucifixion, but we also have the historical documents by non-Christians, such as Josephus, who was a Jewish historian who wrote around AD 90, and Tacitus, who was a Roman historian who wrote just a little bit after that. And we have other writings that tell us about Jesus being crucified and about his followers having this crazy story of him being raised from the dead, and now they're following after him, and they're even willing to die for that testimony. So these are extra biblical documents outside of the Bible that testify to this. So that's why we know that Jesus did die by crucifixion. Now, the second piece of evidence that we've got that atheists and agnostics agree to is this. Soon afterwards, after his crucifixion, his followers had experiences that they thought were actual appearances of the risen Jesus. Now, the reason that scholars say, yeah, they had some kind of an experience is that they were willing to die for that. They were willing to die for the testimony when they were threatened and told, you either recant this story that Jesus was raised from the dead, or we will crucify you, torture you first, and then crucify you. They said, no, I stand by that fact. So that's how we know that they had, the followers had experiences that they thought were actual appearances of the risen Jesus. And that's one of the facts that atheists and agnostics agree to. Number 3, their lives were transformed as a result, even to the point of being willing to die for the faith in the resurrection. Now, here's an interesting story for you. In Philippians 4:3, Paul mentioned somebody named Clement and said that Clement was one of his co-workers. Now, we read about him in week 1 in our first chapter, but you might not have known how important Clement is to history. He became one of the bishops of the church in Rome, as a matter of fact. And we have some of Clement's writings. Now, Clement wrote about the martyrdom of Peter. Now, you'll recall that Peter, when Jesus was arrested, Peter followed behind, And a couple of people said, hey, wait a minute, you're with him. Aren't you one of the followers? And he was afraid. And he denied that he even knew Jesus 3 times. And then later, after the resurrected Jesus appeared to Peter and talked to him and reinstated him as a leader of the church, and told them that one day he was going to get another chance to prove that he was willing to die for Jesus, and let him know that he would one day suffer at martyrdom. But here's the thing. A church historian writing in 325 BC, his name is Eusebius, took a lot of the writings of Clement and many, many other people and wrote a history of the church. And he has this fascinating story here. He says, Eusebius says, to quote another interesting narrative from Clement on this theme from Book 7 of his Miscellanies, quote, they say that when the Blessed Peter saw his wife led away to death, he rejoiced that her call had come and that she was returning home. He called out to her by name in encouragement and comfort. Remember the Lord. Such was the marriage of the blessed and their perfect affection. So Clement tells us something important here, that Rome tortured and crucified his wife before they tortured and crucified Peter. You'll recall from movies that, like the movie Red and many thrillers and such, the bad guys will threaten the good guy, with death or with torture unless they do something that they want him to do, and he'll refuse and be brave, etc. And so they say, this will never work. Let's get the loved one. We'll get one of his loved ones and say, we're going to torture or kill your loved one unless you do what we want. And then that raises the stakes. That's what happened here with Peter. He went from being afraid to testify that he even knew Jesus, to being willing to see his wife, who was also a believer, tortured and crucified before he was tortured and crucified, for his testimony that yes, he had seen Jesus alive. Now, you know what? Sometimes people will die for lies that they think are true, like the kamikaze pilots and sometimes terrorists, but nobody dies for something that they know is a lie. Peter didn't die knowing that what he was preaching was a lie. Peter died and he allowed his wife to die because he knew that, yes, he had seen Jesus raised from the dead. The fourth fact that Dr. Habermas mentions is that these things were taught soon after the crucifixion. In fact, atheists such as Gerd Ludemann say that these were taught, this testimony of Jesus being raised from the dead became a creed of the early church as soon as just a couple years after the crucifixion. And I don't have time to go into all of that right now, but that's fascinating. Even the atheists agree. Yeah, they were spreading this around and had an actual creed, a creed which is found in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-5, possibly 3-6. That was being proclaimed everywhere within just a couple years after the crucifixion. Number 5, James, Jesus's unbelieving brother, became a Christian due to his own experience with who he thought was the resurrected Jesus. James was the brother of Jesus, and the Gospels tell us that he thought Jesus had gone bonkers. When Jesus started going out and preaching and healing, he thought, what is this guy doing? And he and his brothers and his mom, Mary, all came to get him and pull him away from this public ministry he was doing because he didn't think Jesus was the Messiah. But after the crucifixion, we know that James said that Jesus appeared to him alive. And James became a leader of the church. When the Jewish leaders demanded that he recant his testimony, he refused, and they killed him. So he became a martyr for his own half-brother. Paul, of course, we know about Paul. He was a Christian persecutor and became a believer after what he said was an encounter with the resurrected Jesus. Paul was a member of the Pharisees. He was solidly against all of these Christians that were going around testifying that they had seen Jesus alive. He was actually going out with letters to arrest anyone who said that and either put them in prison or at times even kill them, until one day he said the resurrected Jesus appeared to him and said, Paul, from now on, you're going out and you're going to testify that you saw me alive. It's going to cost you many hardships. It's going to bring many difficulties into your life, but this is what I'm calling you to do.
So far, we've looked at 6 minimal facts that scholars are nearly unanimous about as to their historical accuracy. I've listed these on page 77 of your book, Discovering Joy in Philippians. Now, there's one other fact that 75% of scholars agree to, and that is that the tomb was empty. So, what best accounts for these 7 facts? Did the disciples lie about seeing Jesus risen? Scholars don't believe that because no one dies for what they know is a lie. Besides, that doesn't account for the conversions of Jesus' unbelieving brother James, who later became a leader of the church, or of the Christian persecutor Paul. Both of them became believers after they said they encountered the resurrected Jesus. Was the resurrection story a myth that arose over time as eyewitnesses died? Nope. Scholars agree that the resurrection was taught soon after the crucifixion by people who claimed to be eyewitnesses and who were willing to die for their testimony that they saw Jesus alive. Besides, a myth doesn't account for the tomb being empty. Did Jesus merely swoon? No, scholars agree that Jesus actually died. A wounded and weak Jesus crawling on elbows and knees would not have convinced any of the disciples that Jesus rose from the dead. They would have thought that he survived, not that he died and rose. Did the disciples hallucinate out of grief? Hallucinations are private, internal events that can't be shared. They're like dreams in that way. In fact, Navy SEALs during training often hallucinate due to extreme stress and sleep deprivation. Once, when a team paddled a boat, one hallucinated an octopus waving, another a train approaching, and still another a wall they were about to crash into. But hallucinations were never shared. That's how they knew that they were hallucinating, because nobody else saw the same thing. But the creed in 1 Corinthians 15 says Jesus appeared to groups, the 12, over 500 at once, and all the apostles. Besides, hallucinations can't account for the conversions of the unbelievers James and Paul, nor can it account for the empty tomb. There is one conclusion that fits all of the minimal facts, and that is that Jesus really was raised from the dead.
So this week, complete chapter 4 and then come back here for the session 5 video. And down below, please answer these 3 questions. I've got 3 questions for you. The first one is from question 7 of chapter 3. What good has come to you through a past hardship? And what eternal good may God be working through a current hardship? I'd love to hear what you say about that. The second question comes from chapter 3, question 21, and that is, how does seeing your life's purpose as living for Christ affect your attitude towards today's hardships? And then finally, number 3, we had several joy builders from chapter 3, and I'd like to hear what joy builder blessed you the most this past week. And please explain. So go ahead and answer those questions in the comments down below, and I look forward to reading them, and we'll see you next week.